The doctor's hands trembled as he unwound the bandages. "Slowly, Your Grace. Open your eyes slowly." Duke Edmund Ashford had waited 3 years for this moment. 3 years of darkness. 3 years of living like a ghost in his own house. Light poured in, painful, blinding, beautiful. He saw the window. He saw the doctor's gray beard. He saw his own hands, older than he remembered. And then he said his first words as a seeing man, not a prayer, not a thank you. A name. "Bring me Miss Hart. I want to finally see her face." Silence. The housekeeper, Mrs. Potts, stood by the door. Her face had gone white as fresh snow. "Your Grace," her voice broke. "Miss Hart is gone. She left this morning before dawn. No letter, no address, nothing." Edmund felt the room tilt. 3 years this woman had come to him every single night. 3 years her voice had read to him, calmed him, saved him. And on the very day his eyes opened, she vanished. "Nothing," he whispered. "She left nothing at all." Mrs. Potts hesitated. Then she placed something on his lap. A book, the same worn book Miss Hart had read to him 100 times, tied with a simple blue ribbon. Inside the cover, in careful handwriting, one unfinished line. "If you ever learn my real name, please remember the voice first." Her real name. Edmund stared at those words until they blurred. Who was the woman who had sat beside his bed for 3 years? And why did she run the moment he could see? To understand that, we must go back 3 years, back to the night of the fire. 3 years earlier, Ashford Manor glowed like a jewel. It was the night of Duke Edmund's engagement ball. 200 candles, 200 guests, music, champagne, laughter rolling through the great halls. Edmund was 31 years old, handsome, wealthy beyond counting, and about to be married to the most admired lady in the county. He should have been the happiest man in England. But if you had looked closely that night, you would have seen him glancing again and again toward his younger brother Thomas. Thomas Ashford, 24, the kind soul of the family. Everyone loved Thomas, the servants, the tenants, the village children who ran after his horse. Where Edmund was proud and stern, Thomas was warm and gentle. And that night, Thomas was not himself. He stood apart from the dancing, pale, checking the door every few minutes, waiting for someone. At 10:30, a young woman arrived at the servants' entrance. She wore a plain gray dress. She had not been invited. Her name was Clara Winters. The Winters family lived in the modest house beyond the East Woods, once respectable, now poor. Clara's father had lost nearly everything years ago, and the fine families of the county had quietly closed their doors to them. A footman would later swear he saw Miss Winters and young Master Thomas arguing in the corridor near the east wing, voices low but urgent, Thomas gripping her arm, Clara shaking her head again and again as if refusing something. That was at 11 o'clock. At midnight, the east wing was on fire. No one ever agreed on how it started. One moment there was music. The next, a maid was screaming. An orange light was climbing the curtains of the old library like a living thing. Chaos, guests trampling each other toward the doors, the fine ladies' silk gowns catching sparks, horses shrieking in the stables. Edmund did not run for the doors. Edmund ran asterisk into asterisk the east wing, because Thomas was in there. He remembered the smoke. He remembered calling his brother's name until his throat tore. He remembered a beam falling, a burst of white heat across his face, his eyes. And then he remembered nothing at all. When Duke Edmund woke 4 days later, the world was black. The doctors spoke softly around his bed, the way people speak around the dying. The fire had taken his sight. And the fire had taken Thomas. They buried his brother on a gray Tuesday. Edmund stood at the grave he could not see, holding the arm of a footman, while the whole county wept behind him. and the whole county whispered one name: Clara Winters. She had come uninvited. She had been seen arguing with Thomas an hour before the flames, and when the fire broke out, she had been seen near the east wing, her sleeves black with soot. There was no trial, there was no proof, but there did not need to be. Whispers can hang a person just as well as a rope. Within a month, the Winters family was ruined completely. Shops refused to serve them. Old friends crossed the street. Clara's father, already a broken man, took to his bed that winter and never rose from it again. They said he died of a weak heart. Everyone knew better. He died of shame. And Duke Edmund, the new Edmund, the blind Edmund, sat in his darkened study and he made a vow. His fiancée had quietly ended the engagement. A blind husband was not what she had agreed to marry. His brother was in the ground. His eyes were gone. Someone had to pay for all of it. If that woman ever sets foot on my land again, he told his cousin Victor, his voice cold and flat, she will rot in prison. I swear it on Thomas's grave. Victor poured him a glass of brandy and pressed it into his blind hand. Of course, cousin, Victor said gently, of course she will. What Edmund could not see, what no one saw, was the small smile on Victor's face as he said it. But Clara Winters had already disappeared from the county. Some said she went to London. Some said Scotland. Some said she threw herself into the river out of guilt. They were all wrong. Because 3 years later, a quiet woman in a plain dress would knock on the door of Ashford Manor, looking for work. She would give her name as Miss Hart. And the blind Duke, the man who had sworn to destroy her, would fall in love with her voice. The first year of blindness turned Duke Edmund into something the servants feared. He threw a full teapot at a footman who moved a chair without telling him. He fired the cook of 20 years because dinner was late by 10 minutes. He sat in his study with the curtains drawn, as if it made any difference to him, and drank and raged and grieved. The doctors suggested a companion, someone to read to him, to keep his mind from eating itself alive. Edmund allowed it, and then he destroyed every single one of them. The first reader was a retired schoolmaster. He lasted 6 days. Edmund called his voice a squeaking cartwheel and had him sent home. The second was a vicar's widow, 4 days. She reads scripture like a threat. The third, a bright young student from town, lasted 1 single evening. He made the mistake of pitying the Duke out loud. He was out of the house before supper. After the 7th reader fled the manor, some said in tears Mrs. Potts, the housekeeper, stopped trying. For months there was only silence in Ashford Manor. Silence, and the sound of a broken man pacing rooms he could no longer see. Then came the storm of October. It rained for 3 days without stopping. The roads turned to rivers of mud, and on the 3rd evening someone knocked at the kitchen door of the manor. Mrs. Potts opened it and found a young woman standing in the rain. Plain gray dress, soaked through, a small travel bag. She kept her head slightly lowered, the way people do when they have learned not to be noticed. I'm told the house seeks a reader, the woman said quietly, for his grace. Mrs. Potts sighed. Child, save yourself the trouble. He's thrown out 7 already. He'll skin you alive by Thursday. The woman didn't smile, didn't flinch either. I'm not afraid of unkind men, she said, only of having nowhere to go. Something in the way she said it made Mrs. Potts step aside and let her in. She gave her name as Miss Hart. No first name offered. No references except a letter from a bookshop in a distant town saying she was honest and read beautifully. She asked for a small wage, a small room, and 1 strange condition. I'll read to him in the evenings in whatever room he chooses, but the lamps must stay low and he is not to ask about my past. If he asks, I leave that same night. Mrs. Potts frowned. He's blind, dear. What do you care about lamps? Miss Hart looked at the fire for a long moment. Habits, she said softly, just habits. That evening, Mrs. Potts stood outside the Duke's study, praying silently, and knocked. "Your Grace, the new reader is here." "Send them away," came the voice from the darkness, flat, dead. "I'm done with readers." But Mrs. Potts, bless her stubborn heart, had already pushed the young woman inside and closed the door. Silence, the fire cracked, the rain beat against the windows. Edmund sat in his great chair, unshaven, a glass in his hand, his burned eyes staring at nothing. "Well," he snapped, "you're still breathing, I can hear it, I said get out." The woman did not get out. Instead, Edmund heard the quiet sound of a chair being drawn near, then the soft rustle of a book being opened, pages turning until she found her place. "Are you deaf as well as foolish?" he growled. "I will count to 3, 1. And then she began to read. It is a truth universally acknowledged. Edmund's mouth was open to shout. It stayed open. But no sound came out. Because that voice was low and warm like a fire in another room. It didn't perform. It didn't pity. It didn't tremble before the great and terrible Duke. It simply carried him, sentence by sentence, out of the black study, away from the smell of brandy, away from the fire, away from the grave on the hill. For the first time in a year, Duke Edmund listened to something other than his own grief. She read for 1 hour exactly, then she closed the book. "I'll come tomorrow at 8, Your Grace," she said, "if you wish." He should have said no. He had thrown out 7 readers, his fiancée had left him, the world was ash, and he wished for nothing. "8," he heard himself say, "don't be late." At the door she paused. Her voice came quieter this time. "Good night, Your Grace." And when the door clicked shut, Edmund sat alone in the dark, deeply confused by one thing he could not explain. His heart was beating like a young man's. In the corridor, Miss Hart leaned against the wall and pressed a hand over her mouth. Her legs were shaking. They had been shaking the entire hour. She had sat 10 feet away from the man who had sworn on his brother's grave to see her rot in prison. She had listened to him breathe. She had read to him while her heart pounded so loudly she was sure he would hear it and know her. Because Miss Hart was, of course, not Miss Hart. She was Clara Winters. The woman the whole county called a murderer. The woman blamed for the fire, for Thomas's death, for the Duke's ruined eyes. She had walked into the Lion's house through the front door and taken a job at the foot of his chair. Why would a woman do such a thing? Why come back to the one place on earth where being recognized meant prison or worse? Mrs. Potts would have asked if she'd known. You, dear listener, are surely asking now. Clara stood in the cold corridor, steadied her breathing, and whispered a promise to a dead man. "I told you I'd look after him, Thomas. I keep my promises." But even Clara did not know, that rainy October night, how much that promise would cost her. Because upstairs, a letter was already being written. A letter addressed to the Duke's cousin, Victor Ashford. It said, "A new woman has entered the house." Winter came, and something strange happened at Ashford Manor. The Duke stopped throwing things. The servants noticed it first, the way servants notice everything. His Grace shaved again. His Grace asked for tea instead of brandy. His Grace was heard, and 3 maids swore to this on their mother's lives, laughing behind the study door. Every evening at 8 o'clock exactly, Miss Hart knocked, entered, and read. And every evening the hour of reading stretched a little longer. 1 hour became 2, 2 became 3. Because after the book closed, they had begun to talk. It started with small things, the book itself, the weather, the way the fire sounded. Then one night in December, Edmund asked a question he had asked no living soul. "Miss Hart, do you think the dead can hear us?" The pages went still, the fire cracked. "I think," she said slowly, "that love doesn't stop being love just because one heart stops beating." Edmund was quiet for a long time, and then, in the darkness of his own eyes, the great and terrible Duke of Ashford began to speak about his brother. He told her about Thomas as a boy, how he once hid a wounded fox cub in the chapel and fed it stolen ham for a month. How Thomas gave his winter coat to a tenant's son and told their father he'd lost it. How Thomas was the only person on this earth who was never, not once, afraid of him. "He was the best of us," Edmund said. His voice was raw. "It should have been me in that fire." And Miss Hart, sitting 10 feet away, gripped the book so hard her knuckles turned white, and said, very softly, "He wouldn't want you to say that. You speak as if you knew him." A pause, a heartbeat too long. "I know what you've told me, Your Grace. That's enough to know he loved you." Oh, but these evenings were sweet poison for Clara Winters. Every night she sat with the man she had pulled from the flames, the man who did not know she had pulled him from the flames, and she watched him slowly come back to life. His laugh returned. His questions returned. The man beneath the grief began to surface, and God help her, she liked that man. She liked him far too much. And every night, she carried her secret up the servants' staircase like a stone on her back. Because there were other nights, darker ones. Nights when the grief turned to rage, and the rage needed a target, and the target had a name. Clara Winters. Edmund said the name the way you spit out something rotten. You'll have heard the story by now, the servants talk. Some of it, Your Grace. She came to my brother's engagement ball uninvited. She quarreled with him an hour before the fire, and while my house burned, while my brother Asterisk died, she was seen running from the east wing with soot on her sleeves. His blind eyes stared at the fire he could only feel. They never proved it. It doesn't matter. I know it in my bones. And if there is any justice under heaven, that woman is cold and hungry tonight wherever she is. The room was silent. Miss Hart. Yes, Your Grace. You've gone quiet. Clara looked at her own sleeves. For one dizzy moment she was back in the smoke, dragging a dying man by his collar across a burning floor, screaming for help that came too late for Thomas. "The fire in here is warm," she said. "That's all. Shall I go on reading?" Yes, read." And she read in that low, warm voice he loved, while one tear after another rolled silently down her face. He never knew. That was the one mercy of reading to a blind man. You may be angry with her, dear listener. You may be shouting at her right now. Tell him the truth. Tell him you were there. Tell him what really happened. Tell him what Thomas gave you that night. But put yourself in her worn shoes. Who would believe her? The whole county had already judged her. The only witness who mattered was dead, and the man by the fire had sworn on his brother's grave to send her to prison. No, Clara had come back for one reason, and one reason only, the promise she had made to Thomas Ashford as he lay dying in the smoke. "Look after my brother. He'll be alone now, promise me." She had promised, so she stayed. She stayed inside the lion's mouth, and she read to the lion every night, and she let him hate her name in her presence, because keeping the promise mattered more than her own breaking heart. It was a Sunday in February, when Edmund did something he had not done in 3 years. Miss Hart arrived at 8 as always and found a small table set by the fire. 2 cups, real china, the good set, the one locked away since the fire. "Sit," Edmund said, gruff, almost embarrassed. "You've read to me for 4 months. I don't even know if you take sugar." "Your Grace, it's not proper for me to." "I'm blind, Miss Hart. I decide what's proper in the dark. Sit." She sat. She poured. And when she guided his hand gently to the handle of his cup, their fingers touched for a moment, and neither of them pulled away as quickly as they should have. "1 sugar," she said, her voice not quite steady. "1 sugar," he repeated, smiling faintly. 4 months to learn the most important fact about you." If only he knew, she thought. If only he knew the most important fact about me. That night, Mrs. Potts passed the study and heard the two of them laughing at something in the book together at the same moment. And the old housekeeper stood in the corridor, pressed her hand to her chest, and smiled the way mothers smile. But not everyone smiled. Because the following morning, a fine black carriage came up the long drive through the melting snow. Gold trim, matched horses. A footman in expensive livery jumped down and opened the door. Out stepped a tall gentleman in a fur-collared coat, smiling at the manor like a man appraising his own property. Cousin Victor had received the letters, all of them. He knew about the reading. He knew about the laughter. He knew about the tea served in the good china. And he had come to see this Miss Hart for himself. Clara watched the carriage from the upstairs window, and her blood turned to ice water. Because she knew that face. She had seen it before one time, one terrible time, and as her memory clawed at itself trying to place it, only one thing was certain. Wherever she had seen Victor Ashford before, it had something to do with the worst night of her life. Victor Ashford entered the manor the way he entered every room, as if he already owned it. And in a way he almost did. Edmund had no wife, no children, no brother, not anymore. If the Duke died or simply never married, everything passed to Victor. The manor, the lands, the title. Half a lifetime of waiting, one heartbeat away from all of it. "Cousin," Victor's voice boomed warm as summer. He clasped Edmund's hands in both of his. "Look at you, shaved, color in your face. I hardly believe my eyes." "Victor," Edmund smiled, one of the few people he still smiled for. "You didn't write that you were coming. And miss surprising you. Never." Victor turned slowly, and his gaze found the woman standing quietly by the bookshelf, head lowered. "Ah, and this must be the famous reader I've heard so much about." Heard from whom? Clara thought. Edmund never wrote letters anymore. "Miss Hart," Edmund said, and there was something new in his voice when he said the name, something soft. Victor heard it instantly, the way a wolf hears a twig snap. "The woman who saved my sanity." "Miss Hart." Victor crossed the room. Etiquette required a small bow of the head. Instead, he took her hand uninvited and held it a moment too long. "What a asterisk treasure you must be. Tell me, where does a treasure like you come from? Everyone comes from somewhere." "A small town, my lord, near the coast." Her voice stayed level. Years of hiding had taught her that. "You wouldn't know it." "Try me, I know everywhere." "Victor," Edmund's voice carried a faint edge. "Miss Hart doesn't speak of her past. It's the one rule of the house, and it's mine. Leave her be." Victor laughed, raising his hands in surrender. "Forgive me, a mysterious reader. How wonderfully Gothic, cousin, like something from one of your books." But as Clara withdrew to leave the gentleman alone, she felt his eyes on her back the entire way to the door. Not the eyes of a curious man. The eyes of a man doing arithmetic. Victor stayed 9 days. He was, to be fair, wonderful company. He read the newspapers aloud at breakfast. He told stories that made even Mrs. Potts laugh into her apron. He walked Edmund around the gardens, describing the winter roses. And like slow water wearing away stone, he worked. "The Hendersons asked about you again, cousin. I told them you weren't receiving. You aren't, are you? Good, people exhaust you. Your solicitor mentioned the accounts. Let me take that burden. You shouldn't strain yourself with figures you can't even see." Drip, drip, drip. Every sentence a small kindness. Every kindness another brick in the wall he was quietly building around his cousin. And then, on the 6th evening at dinner, Edmund said the words Victor had been dreading for 3 years. "I've had a letter read to me from a surgeon in Paris, a Dr. Lefevre." Edmund's fingers found his glass. "He's restored sight to men with burns like mine, twice now confirmed. He believes I may be a candidate." The dining room went very quiet. Clara, standing near the sideboard with the book she'd brought down for the evening, stopped breathing. Victor set his fork down gently. When he spoke, his voice was pure velvet sorrow. Edmund, cousin, dearest brother of my heart, may I be honest as no one else will be. Always. These men are merchants of hope. They take a fortune from desperate men, cut into their eyes, and sail home rich while you sit in deeper darkness than before. I've made inquiries about this Lefevre. 2 successes, yes, and how many failures does he not publish? Victor reached across and gripped Edmund's hand. You have finally found peace. This house has finally found peace. I could not bear, I could not bear to watch hope destroy you a second time. Please, let it go. Edmund's jaw worked silently. His hand under his cousin's slowly curled into a fist. Perhaps you're right, he said at last very quietly. Perhaps hope is for other men. Victor patted his hand twice and returned to his lamb. And across the room, Clara stood gripping the book against her chest, and inside her something old and fierce woke up. You liar, she thought, staring at Victor's smiling profile. You want him blind and alone and yours. And in that instant, perhaps it was the candlelight on his face, perhaps the particular angle of his smile, her memory finally struck flint. The corridor, the night of the fire, Thomas gripping her arm, not here, he's watching, my cousin is watching us. And over Thomas's shoulder, far down the corridor, a tall figure in the shadows near the east wing, watching, smiling, that same smile. Clara's hands went cold around the book. Victor Ashford had been standing outside the east wing an hour before the fire began, and nobody in 3 years had ever mentioned his name. That night at 8, she came to the study as always, but she did not open the book. Your Grace, may I say something beyond my station? Edmund turned toward her voice. You may say anything. I thought you knew that by now. She knelt beside his chair, closer than she had ever allowed herself, and spoke low and fast before her courage failed. Write to the surgeon, go to Paris. Miss Hart. Your cousin means well, she lied because she had to, but he is wrong. I have watched you come back to life for 4 months, and I will not watch you bury yourself again out of fear. 2 men can see today because of Dr. Lefevre. Why should you not be the third? And if it fails, his voice cracked on the word, if I hope and it fails, then it fails, and I will be here, and I will read to you every night until we are both gray and deaf and ridiculous. Her voice trembled and she let it. But if it succeeds, Your Grace, seeing is living, and you deserve to live. Silence. The fire cracked. Edmund reached out slowly, and his hand found hers where it rested on the arm of the chair. He did not hold it the way a duke holds a servant's hand. He held it the way a drowning man holds a rope. If I do this, he said hoarsely, it will be because of your voice. Everything that has come back to me has come back through your voice. Clara closed her eyes. And when the bandages come off, she thought, the first thing you will do is look at me. And the moment you see my face, everything I gave you back will burn down all over again. My freedom for your eyes. She looked at the blind man, holding her hand like a lifeline. Then it's decided, she whispered, write to Paris. Some kinds of love, dear listener, are quiet like that. They don't stand in doorways weeping. They simply sign their own death warrant with a steady hand, and then they say, now where were we? Chapter 12, I believe. The letter to Dr. Lefevre went out with the Morning Post. And 1 floor above, Victor Ashford stood at his window, watched the postboy ride away, and understood that his gentle poison had failed. He turned to the servant girl he'd been paying since October. The reader, he said softly, I want to know everything about her, where she sleeps, what she wears, what name she talks in her sleep. A woman with no past always has the most interesting one. Find it. Dr. Lefevre arrived from Paris in the first week of April, with 2 assistants, a mountain of instruments, and hands so steady they seemed carved from marble. He examined the Duke's eyes for 3 days. On the 3rd evening, He gave his verdict in careful English. "The burns took the surface, your grace, but the light behind still lives. I have seen this twice before. I operated twice. Both men see." He paused. "I must be honest, there is risk. But yes, I believe you will look upon the world again." Edmund did not cheer. He sat very still, and then he said, in a voice barely above a whisper, "How soon?" "The eyes must be prepared. Drops, rest, darkness. 1 month. Then we operate, and after the operation 2 weeks in bandages. When the bandages come off, we will know." 1 month. Clara heard the news from Mrs. Potts in the kitchen, and she had to set down the tray she was carrying because her hands would not hold it. 1 month. 6 weeks at most. That was what remained of her life at Ashford Manor. That was what remained of the evenings by the fire, of *1 sugar, of his laugh, of being, for the first time since the fire, a person instead of a rumor. She should have left that very night. Every day she stayed was a day closer to the edge of the cliff. She stayed anyway. God forgive her, she stayed for every last evening she could steal. But the manor was no longer safe, and Clara knew it. Twice she found her small room disturbed. Nothing missing, but her travel bag moved an inch, her few letters refolded along different lines. Someone had been searching. Once near the servant stairs, she caught the young maid Betsy, Victor's Betsy, though Clara didn't know that yet, studying her face with narrowed eyes and murmuring, "Funny. You do remind me of a picture I saw once, miss, in an old newspaper." Clara smiled, said something light, and walked away on legs of water. The walls were closing in. From one side the bandages, from the other Victor's quiet hounds. Every night now she wrote half a letter of farewell, and every night she burned it in her candle, because how do you explain the unexplainable? "Dear Edmund, I am the woman you swore to destroy. I am also the woman who pulled you from the fire. Both of these are true, and you will only ever believe one of them." The operation came and went 3 hours behind a closed door while the whole house held its breath. Dr. Lefevre emerged with blood on his apron and quiet triumph in his eyes. "Now we wait. 2 weeks. Then the bandages." And so came the last night. The 14th night. The bandages would come off in the morning. Clara climbed the stairs to the study at 8 o'clock, carrying the book they had never finished, knowing she would never finish it. Edmund sat by the fire, bandaged eyes, restless hands. He heard her step and rose for a reader, for a servant, and reached out until she gave him her hand. "Sit with me," he said. "No book tonight. Tonight I only want the voice." They sat, the fire cracked. Somewhere in the house a clock counted what little was left. "I'm told," Edmund began slowly, "that tomorrow I will see. The doctor is confident. Victor is sulking somewhere, even he has run out of warnings." A faint smile, then it faded. "Miss Hart, I need to say something, and I need to say it tonight, while I'm still blind." "Your Grace." "Edmund, just once before tomorrow, say it." Her throat closed. "Edmund." He exhaled, as if her voice saying his name was something he'd been waiting years to hear. "I have thought carefully about how to say this, and there is no clever way, so I will say it plainly." He turned his bandaged face toward her, unerring, precise, as if he could see her better than anyone ever had. "Marry me." The room stopped. "You will tell me it's impossible," he pressed on before she could speak. "You'll say, a duke and a reader, the scandal, the county, my cousin's face at breakfast. I don't care. I have been surrounded my whole life by people who saw my face, my title, my lands, and not one of them ever saw me until a woman walked in from the rain and never laid eyes on me at all." "Edmund, please." "I don't know what you look like." His voice dropped, rough and warm. "I don't know the color of your eyes, and do you understand, it doesn't matter. Whatever face I see tomorrow, it will be the most beautiful face in England, because it will be the face this voice comes from. I married your voice 3 years' worth of nights ago, Clara, or whoever you are. Tomorrow I only meet my wife." He could not see what those words did to her. He could not see her press both hands over her mouth. He could not see the tears, and she made no sound. 3 years of hiding had taught her to weep in perfect silence. Say yes, Asterisk screamed everything in her that was still young and alive. Say yes, and tomorrow he'll see your face and he'll understand everything, and love will simply have to be enough. But she saw it clear as a painting, the bandages falling away, the joy in his new eyes turning to confusion, then to recognition, then to horror. You in my house, at my fire, holding my hand. The whole beautiful thing curdling into proof of a plot. Victor standing behind him softly. I warned you, cousin. A woman with no past. He would not just hate her. He would hate the last 3 years. She would be taking the fire from him twice. Clara lowered her hands. She made her voice do the hardest work of its life. She made it smile. Ask me tomorrow, she said, when you can see my face, if you still want to ask me tomorrow. Edmund laughed, young, unguarded, certain. Tomorrow, then, the first thing I do with my eyes, I warn you, I'll want the whole county at the wedding. Tomorrow, she echoed. She read to him one last hour, not from the book, from memory, the passages he loved best. When he finally drifted toward sleep in his chair, she stood over him for a long moment. Good night, Edmund, she whispered. And then, so quietly it was hardly sound at all, Thomas would be proud of the man you've become again. That's all I ever promised. She kissed the top of the bandage, lighter than a moth. By candlelight in her small room, she wrote her 20th farewell letter, and could not finish this one either. In the end, she took the worn book they had read that first rainy night, tied it with her blue ribbon, and wrote inside the cover the only sentence that was safe and true at the same time. If you ever learn my real name, please remember the voice first. She left it on her pillow, where they would look first. At dawn, while the mist still held the gardens, a woman in a plain gray dress walked down the long drive of Ashford Manor with one small bag, exactly as she had arrived. She did not look back at the house. If she had, she might have seen a curtain move in Victor's window. Victor watched her go, turning over in his fingers the thing Betsy had finally brought him the night before, a yellowed scrap of newspaper from the bottom of the reader's travel bag. A 3-year-old article about the Ashford fire. And in the margin, in a woman's careful handwriting, 5 words. He was already dead, why? Victor read those 5 words again. For the first time in 3 years, the smile left his face. The reader hadn't been hiding from the truth. She'd been hunting it. Hours later, in a bright room that smelled of carbolic, Dr. Lefever's hands unwound the bandages, and Duke Edmund Ashford opened his eyes to the world. You already know, dear listener, the first words he said. Bring me Miss Hart, I want to finally see her face. And you already know what the whiteness of Mrs. Potts's face was about to tell him. There is a special kind of madness in being given your eyes back, and losing the one thing you wanted to see. For the first week, Edmund refused to believe she was truly gone. She had family trouble. She had an errand. She was testing him. Women in books tested men constantly, and God knew they had read enough books. He sent writers to every coaching inn within 30 miles. Nothing. He sent to the bookshop in the distant town that had written her reference. The reply came in 9 days. The shop had burned down 2 winters ago. The owner had died. There was no record of any Miss Hart. The reference had been written by a dead man. Then describe her, Edmund demanded of his own household, pacing the hall like a caged animal, walking fast, walking freely, cruelly able to see every room she was not in. You had eyes for 3 years while I had none. Someone describe her face to me. And here the strangest thing emerged. Nobody could. Brown hair, your grace, or darkish, offered a footman. She kept her head down like, said the cook, always looked at the floor or the book, never at you. She took her meals alone in her room. said Mrs. Potts, wringing her apron. "Walked in the garden only after dark. In 3 years, Your Grace, I don't believe that girl ever once stood in good light with her face raised." Edmund stood very still, because he was remembering the strange condition from the first rainy night. The lamps must stay low, and he is not to ask about my past. He had thought it a servant's shyness. It was not shyness. It was strategy, 3 years of it. The woman had lived in his house like a whisper, heard by everyone, seen by no one. "Her room," he said hoarsely, "now." The little room under the eaves was swept clean as a church. A narrow bed, an empty wardrobe smelling faintly of lavender. She had left nothing. Almost nothing. In the drawer of the small writing desk, wedged deep in the back seam, Edmund's searching fingers found a folded slip of paper. A receipt from a bookseller in the market town for 2 volumes of poetry dated last autumn. Booksellers require a signature for accounts. At the bottom of the slip, water-blurred but half alive, a signature, not heart. The first letter was a tall, looping *C*. The surname began with an unmistakable **W. The rest dissolved into a stain. C.W. Edmund stared at those 2 letters, and somewhere very deep, in a cellar of his mind he had locked 3 years ago, something stirred and dragged its chains. No, absurd, impossible. There were 1,000 names in England, beginning with C.W. Victor arrived, again unannounced, again perfectly timed. The way carrion birds are always perfectly timed, 2 days later. He found his cousin in the study, unshaven for the first time since the bandages, the receipt on the desk before him like a small white wound. "Edmund, you look like a man digging a grave with his bare hands. The whole county says you've turned the roads upside down for a runaway servant." "She's not a servant." The old flat deadness was creeping back into Edmund's voice, and Victor drank the sound of it like wine. "Victor, you met her. You saw her face in daylight. Describe her to me." Victor settled into the chair across the desk slowly, arranging his coat. He let the silence ripen. He was, whatever else one may say of him, a masterful performer. He had rehearsed this scene in his head for 2 days, ever since his own writers had confirmed what the newspaper scrap had already told him. The woman was hunting him, so the law must hunt the woman, and the law, conveniently, was in love with her. All it needed was a push. "I'll do better than describe her," Victor said quietly. "But first pour yourself a drink, cousin, and forgive me, you will want to shoot the messenger." "Victor." I knew her face troubled me the moment I took her hand in this very house. It took me weeks to place it, and when I placed it, I prayed I was wrong. I rode to the newspaper offices in the county town myself. I asked for their old editions. From his breast pocket, with tender care, like a man handling a relic, Victor drew a folded page and laid it on the desk, facing his cousin. "The Spring Gazette, 3 years ago, page 4. Edmund looked down. It was a rough engraving, the kind provincial papers made from a likeness, a young woman's face above a caption. He had never seen this page. He had been lying in bandages when it was printed, and by the time he could have had it read to him, he had forbidden the name from the house. The engraving was crude, the face was not. Head slightly lowered, grave, steady eyes that looked at you from under their lashes, as if measuring how much truth you could bear. He had never seen Miss Hart, but he had spent 14 days memorizing the asterisk idea of her, building her face 100 ways in the dark, and every servant's half-description, the lowered head, the measuring quiet, the asterisk shape of the woman he loved snapped onto this cheap engraving like a key into a lock. Below the picture, the caption, "Miss Clara Winters, of Winters Cottage, questioned in connection with the Ashford fire. C.W." The clock ticked, the fire cracked, and for the first time in his life, Edmund flinched from the sound of it. "No," he said. "Cousin." The word came out of him like something breaking. He was on his feet, the chair crashing backward. "You're telling me that Clara Winters, the woman who burned my house, who killed Thomas, walked through my front door, took a false name, and sat beside my blind face for 3 years, that I told her that she let me?" His voice tore. He pressed the heel of his hand against his new eyes, his miraculous eyes, as if he wanted to give them back. Why? Why would she do it? What in God's name did she want? And Victor rose and came around the desk and laid both hands on his shaking cousin's shoulders and looked into his face with bottomless, loving sorrow, and drove the knife home with surgical gentleness. "Edmund, dearest Edmund, what does a murderer want in the house of the only living witness?" A pause, one beat perfect. "She came back to finish what the fire started, and you were about to marry her. If those bandages had come off 1 day later—" "Get out. Cousin, get out." Victor withdrew, humbly, sadly, magnificently, and closed the study door with the softness of a coffin lid. In the corridor, alone, he permitted himself one long breath. Behind the door, he heard glass shatter against a wall. The thing was done. He hadn't needed to lift a hand against the woman. He had simply handed his cousin's own broken heart to him, sharpened. Inside the study, Edmund stood among the ruins of his own miracle. Every treasure of the last 3 years turned to poison in his hands, one by one. "I'm not afraid of unkind men, of course not," she had made him one. The lamps kept low, not shyness, camouflage. Her tears the night he cursed Clara Winters, not the story, guilt, weeping at its own name. "Ask me tomorrow, not love." Escape, buying one last night. The voice, even the voice, especially the voice. It had all been a lie with a beautiful sound. Grief has to go somewhere, dear listener. In weak men it becomes despair. In proud men, and Edmund Ashford was nothing if not proud, it becomes purpose. When he walked out of the study at midnight, the servants saw the old Duke again. The stone one. The one from the year after the fire. He put the receipt and the newspaper page into his breast pocket, over his heart, like ammunition. "Saddle 2 horses at dawn," he told the stable boy, "and send word to Magistrate Crane that I will call on him tomorrow." "Yes, your grace, shall I say what about?" Edmund looked out the window north, where the market towns were, where a woman with a lowered head and a warm, low voice was hiding somewhere among ordinary people, believing herself safe. "About an arrest," he said. "They found her by a thread, literally by a thread. 2 weeks of riders, posted notices, and questions in every market square had produced nothing, because Edmund's men were asking for a face, and the woman they hunted did not show her face. It was a haberdasher's wife, in a town 20 miles north, who finally said the words that mattered. A face like that I couldn't tell you, sir, but there's a new seamstress at Mrs. Fletcher's shop, keeps to the back room, they say, and my sister swears she has the loveliest low voice you ever heard. Like a fire in another room, my sister says." 20 miles away, in his study, Edmund heard the report and closed his eyes, his new, his miraculous, his traitorous eyes. Like a fire in another room. "Prepare the carriage," he said, "and send for Magistrate Crane's men. They're to wait outside the town until I send word. I will see her first." His voice didn't waver, and he hated himself for how much effort that took. Alone. Mrs. Fletcher's dress shop stood on a quiet lane, wedged between a bakery and a chandler. A bell above the door, bolts of cloth in the window, and spring light falling through onto the wooden counter. Edmund stood across the lane for a long time before he crossed it. Understand what this moment was, dear listener. For 3 years this man had lived in the dark, and one voice had been his son. For 14 bandaged days he had built her face in his mind 100 different ways, each one more beloved than the last. He had planned to spend his first day of sight looking at her. Now he was finally going to see her, with a warrant folded in his breast pocket, where a wedding ring should have been. The bell rang as he entered. "One moment, if you please," called Mrs. Fletcher from somewhere among the shelves. "Ellen, dear, see to the gentleman." Ellen, a third name. How many skins did this woman have? Steps from the back room. Light steps he knew, God help him. He knew her by her asterisk footsteps. And then she came through the curtain with a bolt of blue muslin in her arms and her head beginning to lift, the shop girl's greeting already half-formed. "Good morning, sir, how may I?" The muslin hit the floor. And Duke Edmund Ashford looked, for the first time in his life, at the face of the woman he loved. Later, much later, he would be ashamed of what happened inside him in that first second. Because in that first second, before memory, before the newspaper engraving, before the warrant in his pocket, his heart leapt asterisk. His whole ruined chest simply lifted, the way it had every evening at 8 o'clock for 3 years, and one thought rang through him like a bell. There you are. She was not beautiful the way ballroom women are beautiful. She was beautiful the way a lit window is beautiful to a man freezing in the dark. Grave, steady gray eyes. A tired mouth built for smiles it rarely permitted. The exact face of the voice, the moment he saw her, he could not imagine the voice living anywhere else. 1 second. He was allowed exactly 1 second of that. Then the engraving surfaced, the crude lines, the caption underneath. Miss Clara Winters questioned in connection with the Ashford fire. And the light in the window went out. "Say something." His voice came out low and strange. "I've been shown a picture. Pictures lie. Servants' memories lie. But there is one thing in this world that cannot lie to me." He stepped closer. She stood frozen among the fallen muslin. "Say something." Clara looked at him, at the eyes she had prayed for, seeing her at last, exactly the way she had always known they one day would, and she understood that the running was over. There was almost peace in it. "Hello, Edmund," she said. The voice. Her asterisk voice, and it did not lie, and it convicted her in 4 soft syllables. Edmund made a sound he had never made before, something between a laugh and a wound. He turned away from her, one hand gripping the counter, his knuckles white. 3 years, he said to the counter, to the floor, to the God who had returned his eyes just in time for this. 3 years you sat beside me. I told you about Thomas. I told you things I've never, he stopped, mastered it, and when he turned back his face was the stone face, the magistrate's face. Was any of it true? The reading, the T, the asterisk tomorrow, his voice cracked on that word, only that word. Or was my cousin right? Were you simply waiting for me to be well enough to be worth destroying? And here is the moment, dear listener, where you will want to reach through the years and shake her. Because Clara Winters looked at the man she loved and said nothing. Not, "I pulled you out of that fire," not, "Your brother died in my arms and his last breath was your name," not, "Ask Victor where he stood at 11 o'clock that night." Nothing. Understand her if you can. She had rehearsed her defense 1,000 nights, and 1,000 nights it had ended the same way. Her word, the word of the county's murderess, against 3 years of false names. Every true thing she said would sound like a cornered liar's fairy tale. And there was one thing more, one thing she could not risk. If she accused Victor now with no proof, Victor would know how much she knew. And men like Victor did not leave witnesses twice. No, the truth had one door left, and it did not open from her side. So she straightened her back and folded her hands, and did the bravest, most terrible, most infuriating thing a wronged woman can do. She stayed silent. "Nothing," Edmund breathed. "You have nothing to say to me." "You've already been given my answers," Clara said quietly. "You were given them 3 years ago by the same people who are giving them to you now. What could my voice possibly change? It's only the thing you loved." That was cruel, and she knew it, and she watched it land, and her heart broke at its own marksmanship. Edmund walked to the door. He opened it. He raised one gloved hand toward the end of the lane. They came at once, 4 constables and the magistrate's clerk, boots loud on the cobbles. while Mrs. Fletcher pressed her hands to her mouth and the whole lane filled with faces. "Clara Winters." The clerk unfolded his paper. "You are taken in charge upon suspicion of arson at Ashford Manor, and in the matter of the death of the Honorable Thomas Ashford." She did not weep. She did not run. She held out her wrists like a woman who had been expecting the knock for 3 years because she had been. But as they led her past Edmund, she stopped. The constables allowed it. Even they felt something in the air of that shop. She looked up at him, close enough that he could see what the engraving had gotten wrong, that her gray eyes were not grave at all, up close. They were grieving. They had been grieving for years. "One thing, Your Grace." Her voice stayed low and warm, even now, especially now. "In 3 years of nights you told me everything about your brother, how he laughed, what he hid in the chapel as a boy, everything except one." She glanced at the warrant in the clerk's hand, then back into Edmund's new eyes. "In all this time, in all this county, with all these clever men around you, no one has ever asked me what Thomas said before he died." The lane went silent. "You have your eyes now, Edmund," she said softly, stepping past him into the constable's hands. "Try using them on the people you trust." They put her in the wagon. The door closed. The horses pulled away over the cobbles, and the Duke of Ashford stood in front of a dress shop with a bolt of blue muslin unrolled at his feet like a piece of fallen sky, and did not move for a very long time. What Thomas said before he died. She had been there. She had just confessed it, no worse. She had offered it freely like a key held out through prison bars. Murderers flee. Murderers deny. Murderers do not stop on their way to the gallows to hand the prosecution a gift. "Unless it isn't a gift," whispered his pride, Victor's voice curled inside it like smoke. "Unless it's bait. She has lied with every breath for 3 years. This is simply the next lie, the cleverest one." Edmund picked up the fallen muslin, set it gently on the counter, and walked out. He had chosen his answer. He told himself he had chosen his answer. Then why, dear listener, why, on the long ride home, with justice finally done and his brother finally avenged, did the Duke of Ashford feel like the one who had just been arrested? The county celebrated. Church bells in 3 villages. The magistrate shook Edmund's hand for a full minute. Neighbors who had not called in 3 years suddenly remembered the way to Ashford Manor, and every one of them said some version of the same sentence. "Justice at last, Your Grace. Now poor Thomas can rest." And every night, alone in the great house, the Duke of Ashford lay awake while one quiet sentence ate him alive. "No one has ever asked me what Thomas said before he died." He tried Victor's medicine first, bait, the cleverest lie, and for 2 days it worked the way brandy works, which is to say it worked until it wore off. Because Victor's medicine could not answer the simplest question, the one that circled Edmund's bed at 3 in the morning like a patient dog. What did she want? Murderers returned to silence witnesses. She had sat beside a helpless, blind, sleeping witness for 1,000 nights, with candles, with fire irons, with his medicine cups in her hands, and what had she done to him? She had healed him. She had talked him out of his grave, argued him into the surgery that gave him back his eyes, her own captor's eyes, and the night before those eyes opened, she had refused the one thing that would have made her a duchess and put his fortune in her reach. Then she had vanished, taking nothing, leaving a book. Edmund got up, lit a lamp, and read the inscription again, the way he had every night since the arrest. "If you ever learn my real name, please remember the voice first." She had known. All along she had known this exact night would come, him, the lamp, her name in his mouth like a stone. And her one request from the far side of catastrophe was not "believe me asterisk," not "forgive me asterisk." Remember the voice first. At 4 in the morning, the Duke of Ashford finally did what he should have done 3 years earlier. He stopped grieving like a brother, stopped raging like a victim, and started thinking like a magistrate. Fact, the fire began in the East Wing library. Not a bedroom with a careless candle, not a kitchen. A library, a room of papers. Fact, Thomas, gentle Thomas who loved everyone, had spent his last week alive pale, sleepless, waiting by doors. Fact, Thomas had quarreled that night not with an enemy but with Clara Winters, the neighbor's daughter, his childhood friend from before the Winters family fell. And the footman's words, dug out of the old inquest papers Edmund now spread across his desk, were stranger than he remembered. Master Thomas was gripping her arm, sir. She kept shaking her head, like she was refusing him something. Refusing him something. You do not refuse a man you have come to murder. Fact, and here Edmund's pen stopped moving. The inquest file was thin. Thinner than a dead nobleman's file had any right to be. Pages referenced that were not there, and one name appeared nowhere in it at all, though he had been in the house that night, though he had been seen that night. Victor. You have your eyes now, Edmund. Try using them on the people you trust. The old valet was called Mr. Prout, and finding him took 8 days. He had been Thomas's man, valet, confidant, keeper of his coats and half his secrets, and he had been dismissed a month after the fire. Edmund, blind and buried in grief, had signed the household reductions without hearing the names. The papers, he now discovered, had been prepared by Victor. Every servant close to Thomas, the valet, the boy who carried his letters, gone within a month, scattered like ash. Prout had come down to a single rented room over a cobbler's, in a town near the coast. When he opened the door and saw the Duke of Ashford filling the frame, the old man went gray, sat down on his narrow bed and said, 3 years, 3 years I've been waiting for someone to come, your grace. I prayed it would be you and not the other one. Tell me, Edmund said. And Prout told him. It started 10 days before the ball. Master Thomas came to me white as this wall. He'd been going over estate letters with the London Bank, some matter of a loan taken against Ashford land. Signed and sealed with the family seal, all in order, except your grace, Prout's hands twisted. Except asterisk, you never took that loan. And Master Thomas knew every paper you signed. Someone had put the Ashford seal to documents you'd never seen. Thousands of pounds, your grace. Debts. Gambling asterisk debts. We found out after, and the trail of them ran straight through Mr. Victor's clubs in London. The room was very quiet. Thomas confronted him. Edmund's voice didn't sound like his own. Begged him more like, you know how Master Thomas was, couldn't hate a wasp that stung him. He gave Mr. Victor a week to confess to you himself. Said family shame should be settled in family. Mr. Victor wept, sir, swore on his mother. And Master Thomas, God keep his kind soul, believed the weeping. Prout's jaw tightened. I didn't. I told him, I said, Master Thomas, a man who forges a seal will forge a tear, so he made a plan for the ball night. Whatever happened, the proof mustn't stay in the house. It had to go to someone outside the household. Someone no servant of Victor's would think to watch. Someone he trusted like his own hands. Clara Winters, Edmund whispered. Miss Clara. The old man's eyes went soft and wet. They'd been friends since children, sir, before her family's troubles. She was the only soul from the old days who never wanted a thing from him. He sent for her to come quiet by the servant's door during the ball when every eye was on the dancing. She didn't want it. That arguing the footman saw. She was asterisk refusing, your grace, begging him to take it all straight to you instead, that very night. And Master Thomas told her, Prout stopped, steadied himself. Master Thomas told her, asterisk, not here, he's watching us. Edmund closed his eyes, his new eyes, and in the self-made dark he saw it the whole night, rebuilt at last the right way round, the shadow at the end of the corridor, the library of papers chosen for the flames, the proof turning to smoke, and with it, the only man who understood what the smoke was for. The fire, Edmund said. You're telling me my cousin burned my house to burn a asterisk loan. I'm telling you what I know, and then I'm telling you the part that's kept me from sleep for 3 years. Prout leaned forward, and his voice dropped to almost nothing. I was in the yard when the east wing went up. I saw the whole terrible business of that night. I saw you run in, your grace, when no man could hold you, and I saw who dragged you out. The little room seemed to tilt. A beam came down on you not 10 feet past the door. We could see it through the windows, and not one of us, God forgive us, not one grown man of us went in. She went in. Prout was weeping now openly without shame. Little Miss Clara went into that furnace in her muslin dress, and she took you by the collar and she dragged you, a man twice her weight, down the burning gallery and out the terrace doors. Her sleeves were afire, sir. Her hands, he pressed his own hands together. You never knew. You were senseless, and your eyes were gone, and by morning the whole county had decided that the soot on her sleeves meant she'd set the fire. And Mr. Victor was the first to say so out loud. The gloves. She wore gloves, Betsy had reported to Victor. She walked in the garden only after dark. She kept to low lamps. Edmund had catalogued it all as cunning, as 3 years of strategy. Burned scars. She had been hiding his fire on her skin in his own house while she read to him. Edmund stood because sitting had become impossible. He made it to the little window. Below the ordinary street, a woman haggling over fish, the sea somewhere past the roofs. Prout, he forced the words out one at a time. Did she reach Thomas? She went back in for him, your grace. After you. The roof of the library came down, and still the old man had to stop. She found him, she was with him at the end. What passed between them only she can say, but I'll tell you what she said to me that same night in the yard with her hands ruined and her voice so calm it frightened me. She looked back at that burning wing and she said, Mr. Prout, the fire didn't kill him. He was already going when I reached him. Somebody struck him down and left him for the smoke. Prout looked up at his duke. He was already dead, Mr. Prout. Why? Why strike a dying man's house alight, and then the constable's lanterns were coming, sir, and by sunrise she was the murderess, and no one ever asked her anything again. Except one question at the inquest. Why was there soot on your sleeves? The room, the street, the fishwife, the sea, all of it went away, and Edmund stood in a silence like the inside of a bell. 3 years. 3 years she had carried it, the scars, the name, the promise. 3 years the county had spat when she passed. Her father had died of it. And when there was nothing left of Clara Winters to ruin, she had walked back through the lion's front door, taken a false name in the house of the man who had sworn to destroy her, to keep a promise to a dead friend. Look after my brother. He had asked her once by the fire why she wept. The story, she'd said. Your Grace, Prout's voice from very far away. There's one thing more. The proof burned, all of it, but Master Thomas was cleverer than they knew. When I dressed him for the ball that evening, he showed me something. Something he meant to give Miss Clara along with the papers. He said, even if everything burns, Prout, this doesn't lie. What was it? That, sir, I never saw close, small. He kept it in his fist. The old man shook his head. If she reached him alive, if he had one breath left in him, then whatever it was and whatever he said. Clara has both, Edmund finished. He was already reaching for his coat. His hands were shaking, and for once he didn't care who saw. She had told him. Standing in the lane in irons, she had told him where the truth was kept, and he had ridden home congratulating himself on his justice. Prout, pack whatever you own. You're coming with me, you'll be safer at the manor, and the magistrate must hear every word of this under oath before. Hooves in the street below, fast ones. Edmund reached the window in time to see his own groom, Davy, hauling a lathered horse to a stop before the cobbler's shop, Davy, who was supposed to be a day behind him with the second carriage. The boy looked up, found his master's face in the window, and even from 1 floor up, Edmund could see he'd been riding like the devil was behind him. Your Grace, Davy's voice cracked across the quiet street. Your Grace, you must come now, it's the trial, sir. The trial is set for the summer assizes. That's 7 weeks. Not any more, Your Grace. The boy was gasping. Word came the day you left. It's been moved up a special sitting, they said. Pressure from asterisk important friends of the family asterisk, they said, seeing as the case is so plain and the county so upset. Davy swallowed. It starts Monday, sir. Monday. 3 days. And 200 miles between this little room and the courthouse where the important friends of the family had already. Edmund understood with perfect, ice-cold clarity, chosen the jury. Victor was not waiting to see what his cousin would find. Victor was going to hang her first. They rode as men ride in nightmares hard and never fast enough. 200 miles in under 3 days. Edmund bought fresh horses at double price in every town, and old Prout, God bless his loyal bones, endured it all without one word of complaint, gripping his hat to his chest like the truth itself was folded up inside it. On the second night they stopped at a coaching inn, because even hate must let horses rest. Edmund took 2 rooms, set Davy on a cot across Prout's door, and lay down dressed for 3 hours at most. When he woke, the gray light was wrong. Too late. Davy was slumped against the doorframe in a sleep far too deep for an 18-year-old on duty, and the tankard of small beer the boy had been given by a friendly ostler at midnight told Edmund everything before he even reached Prout's door. The room was empty. No struggle. The bed not slept in. On the floor by the window the old man's pipe, the one he'd been thumbing all journey, the one he'd have never willingly left, lay in 2 pieces on the boards. The innkeeper knew nothing. A carriage had come and gone before dawn. Carriages come and go, sir, it's a coaching inn. No, he couldn't say the crest. It was dark, sir. Edmund stood in the little empty room, holding the 2 halves of a dead man's servant's pipe, and understood he was not fighting his cousin. He was fighting a spider. And every road, every inn, every friendly ostler in the county was a strand of the web, and Edmund had ridden his only witness straight into it, proud as a fool, announcing his route with every horse he bought. Your Grace, Davy stood swaying in the doorway, gray-faced with the drug and with shame. Your Grace, I'll never forgive. You're alive, Edmund said quietly, which means you weren't the target. Get on your horse, Davy. We now know exactly what my cousin is willing to do, which means we know exactly what he did 3 years ago. He put the broken pipe carefully into his breast pocket, next to the receipt with her signature. And we have until Monday to prove it with witnesses he cannot find. Because I promise you, boy, there is one witness left. She's in the county jail. And this time, no one is taking her out of my sight. The courtroom on Monday morning was fuller than the church at Easter. They came from 4 parishes. They stood in the gallery, on the stairs, in the street below the open windows. 3 years of whispers had come at last to their feast day, and no one intended to miss the seating of the murderess. Victor Ashford arrived in deep mourning gray and took the front bench, where he received the county's sympathy with the weary grace of a man carrying his family's grief alone. He had brought, the gallery noted approvingly, a portrait miniature of poor Thomas, which he set upon the rail before him. He did not look at the door when his cousin entered. He didn't need to. He had known for 2 days that Prout was, how had his man phrased it, resting comfortably somewhere quiet asterisk. Whatever fire Edmund had come to light, the wood was already wet. Then they brought her up, and the room made a sound like the sea. Clara Winters, thinner in prison gray, her hands folded, her scarred hands, bare now for all the county to see and misread. She climbed to the dock, lifted her head, 3 years of hiding done, no reason left to lower it, and looked calmly out over the packed benches of people who had ruined her family, until her eyes found the one face she had promised herself not to look for. Edmund. He had taken a place not beside his cousin, but directly across the floor alone, and he was looking at her the way, no. She turned her eyes away. Hope, she had learned, was the only cruelty left that could still find new skin to burn. Order, said the judge. Understand, dear listener, how neatly the box had been built. The prosecutor was brisk and reasonable and never once raised his voice because he never needed to. The uninvited arrival. The quarrel, the footman, older now but word perfect, the soot on the sleeves, and then the crowning gift, the one no defense could survive. 3 years in the victim's own household under a false name, wearing a dead man's forged reference. Innocent women, the prosecutor observed mildly, do not spend 3 years rehearsing. The gallery murmured its agreement. Several jurors nodded along, nodded asterisk early asterisk, before evidence, the way men nod at a song they've already been taught. Edmund watched the jury with a magistrate's eye and counted at least 5 faces he knew, tenants of Victor's friends, a corn merchant deep in Victor's bank, a man whose son held a living in Victor's gift. Wet wood, all of it. When his turn came, he took the stand and did everything wrong, magnificently. He renounced his own accusation in front of 4 parishes. He testified to the forged seal, the false loans, the missing inquest pages, the argument that was a refusal, the woman who dragged him from the fire. By your own account, Your Grace, the prosecutor interposed, gently, regretfully, everything you have just told the court you had from a former servant. Where is this Mr. Prout? He was abducted from the Swan at Marston 3 nights ago. Abducted, a pause measured for the gallery, or paid and departed. An old man dismissed years ago, poor, telling a grieving nobleman exactly what he most wished to hear. Sir, I will not insult you. The court grieves for what you have suffered, 3 years of blindness, a miraculous recovery, and throughout it all at your side morning and night one voice. The prosecutor turned to the jury and spread his hands with terrible kindness. Gentlemen, the defense the prisoner could not construct in 3 years, she has been constructing all along in His Grace himself. That is not a witness, gentlemen. That is her finest work. And there it was, the perfect box. Every truth Edmund told was proof of her cunning. The more he fought, the more bewitched he appeared. He stepped down from the stand into a silence full of pity, and the pity was worse than jeers. He had eyes now, and a voice, and a dukedom, and none of it was worth 1 page of burned paper. The judge glanced at the clock. The jury was ready. Anyone could see the jury had been ready since breakfast. It was not yet noon. They would hang her by the summer. Before the jury retires, the judge said, in the tone of a man observing a formality, the prisoner may speak if she wishes. The room rustled, settling in for the traditional weeping, the protestations, the thing they had truly come to see. Clara Winters stood. She did not look at the jury, whom she could not win, nor the gallery, whom she had lost years ago. She looked across the floor at Edmund, at the man who had just burned his name in front of 4 parishes for her, and something in her face quietly came to a decision. For 3 years she had stayed silent to keep a promise and a secret. But the secret had only one purpose, to be safe until it could strike true. And she understood, watching Edmund stand alone in the wreckage of his testimony, that true had finally arrived. Not because the court was just, but because, for the first time since the fire, she was not the only one telling the story. My lord, she said, and the low, warm voice carried to the last stair of the gallery, I was asked one question at the inquest 3 years ago. Why was there soot on my sleeves? I have been answering it ever since. May I now answer a question nobody asked? The judge frowned. The prosecutor half rose. But 200 people leaned forward as one, and there are tides even a bought judge cannot turn in an open courtroom. Thomas Ashford did not die of the fire. Her voice did not tremble. It had read through 3 years of nights. It knew how to hold a room in the dark. When I reached him in the library, the flames were still at the far shelves, and he was already dying on the floor, struck down from behind. The fire was not the weapon, my lord. The fire was the asterisk broom set to sweep away papers and a body, and any question of how that body fell. Conjecture, said the prosecutor. Testimony, said Clara. I held him. He had strength for very little, and he spent it, my lord, on 3 things: A message for his brother which I have carried 3 years and will deliver to its owner, not to this room. Across the floor, Edmund gripped the rail. A promise he asked of me which is kept and being kept, and a thing he pressed into my hand with the last of his grip, and these words, they will burn the papers. This they cannot burn, it does not lie. And where, the judge asked dryly, is this deathbed treasure? The prisoner was searched at her arrest. They searched a seamstress, my lord, Clara said, and took her scissors. She raised her scarred hands, turned back the hem of her left cuff, the gallery pressing forward, constables stepping close, and picked loose 4 small stitches that 3 years of needlework had made invisible. Onto the rail of the dock, she set a man's gold signet ring. The seal of the House of Ashford, she said into the roaring silence, which would be nothing remarkable except that His Grace the Duke is wearing the seal of the House of Ashford on his right hand in this courtroom at this moment. There has only ever been one. She looked up. So let the court ask itself a single question. Thomas Ashford died holding a *2. Chaos then, the gallery erupting, the judge hammering, the prosecutor objecting to everything and nothing. Edmund was already crossing the floor, already turning the ring under the tall windows with hands that shook. The Ashford arms, cut deep and true, a forgery fine enough to fool a London bank. And inside the band, where a craftsman signs his soul, tiny, proud, unmistakable, a maker's mark, a running fox above the letters *JB. Josiah Brant, Edmund said aloud, and his voice cracked like ice going off a pond. Goldsmith, carver of seals. His shop stands in the county town, my lord, 1 hour's ride from this courtroom, and every seal cutter in England keeps an order book, because a man who cuts a false seal hangs beside the man who ordered it, unless his book can say who paid. He turned Duke of Ashford, magistrate, injured party, and 4 parishes could now see it plainly, a man in love to face the bench. My lord, adjourn until 3 o'clock, and I will have Brant and his order book before this court if I must carry them both on my back. Refuse me, and here he let his eyes rest, for one long and terrible moment, on the jury benches, on the corn merchant, on the front bench in mourning gray. Refuse me, and I will ride tonight to London, to men whose names I will not speak in a room this crowded, and this county will discover what an assize looks like when it is conducted properly. The judge looked at the Duke. The judge looked at the gallery, 4 parishes, 200 witnesses, 30 open windows. Wet wood, Victor had promised himself, watching from the front bench with his dead cousin's portrait before him, and his own maker's mark lying on the dock rail like a small golden trap sprung across 3 years. The judge cleared his throat. The court, he said, will rise until 3 o'clock. They brought Josiah Brant at 2:30, a round, frightened, honest little man clutching a canvas-wrapped ledger, blinking at the largest crowd of his life. At 3 he took the oath. He confirmed the fox and the letters. He was handed the ring and needed only one look. I cut this, sir, 4 years ago come autumn. I remember it particular because I didn't want the work copying a noble seal, that's no business for a Christian shop, but the gentleman said it was for the family, said the old one was worn and the Duke wanted a spare made quiet as a surprise like, paid triple, in gold. And gentlemen don't lie, sir. Leastways, the little goldsmith swallowed. That's what I believed 4 years ago. The order book, said the judge, who was, whatever he had been paid, no longer able to be anything but a judge in front of 30 open windows. Is the buyer's name in your book? Better, M. Lord. Brant unwrapped the ledger with shaking hands. It's in his own writing, signed for on collection as is proper with seal work, page 41. The clerk carried the book up. The judge put on his spectacles. The courtroom did not breathe. And is the gentleman who signed this page, the judge asked slowly, present in this courtroom? Josiah Brant looked up from his ledger. His eyes went along the benches past the jury, past the prosecutor, past the Duke, and stopped, with the dreadful simple honesty of a tradesman on the front bench. On the man in mourning gray, sitting very still beside the portrait of Thomas Ashford. "Yes, Lord," said the goldsmith, and raised his hand and pointed. "That's him there. That's the gentleman, Mr. Victor Ashford." For 3 full seconds after the goldsmith's finger stopped moving, Victor Ashford did not move at all. Then he laughed. It was a good laugh, light, astonished, a gentleman's laugh at an absurd misunderstanding, and it might even have worked 3 years ago on a county that loved him. He rose, hand on heart, half turning to the gallery as if to share the joke. "My lord, really, the word of a tradesman, a page of scribble against." "Against your own signature," said the judge, who had spent the recess doing arithmetic of his own, and had concluded correctly that there are moments when the only safe side is the right one, which the clerk will now compare against the letters of condolence you wrote to half this county, several of whose recipients, I observe, are sitting in this room and may open their writing desks tonight. Constables. And the county watched Victor Ashford's face do something none of them ever forgot. The grief fell off it, not slowly, all at once, like a mask with the string cut, and what was underneath was not rage or fear, but a kind of petulant, cheated asterisk boredom, the face of a man who had played flawlessly for 3 years and lost to a seamstress's 4 stitches. He looked at the ring on the rail. He looked at his cousin. "You were supposed to stay blind," he said, quite calmly, quite quietly in front of 200 witnesses, and the clerk wrote it down. They took him out through a gallery so silent you could hear his boot heels the whole way. By evening he had begun naming names to save his neck: the ostler, the vanished inquest pages, the man paid to hold a certain elderly servant at a farm near Marston, where the constables found Mr. Prout that very night, furious, unharmed, and demanding his pipe. And in the courtroom, into a hush like held breath, the judge turned to the dock. "Clara Winters, this court finds the charges against you unsupported in every particular. You are discharged with—" And here the old judge removed his spectacles and rubbed his eyes, and for a moment looked simply like a tired man ashamed of his county, with what I fear is 3 years too little and far too late. "You are free, madam." The gallery, the same gallery, dear listener, the same 4 parishes that had crossed streets to avoid her, that had let her father die of shame, the gallery rose and asterisk cheered asterisk her. Clara stood in the dock and watched them cheer, and her face was the face from the engraving after all, grave, steady, measuring how much truth they could bear. They had needed a ring to believe her, not her word, not 3 years, a small circle of gold. She stepped down without smiling, took her one small bag from the clerk, and walked toward the doors through a crowd that parted for her now, bowing now, murmuring asterisk Miss Winters, God bless you, Miss Winters, the same mouths, the same street, 3 years apart. Edmund caught her at the courthouse steps. Her name at last in his voice in daylight. He had rehearsed nothing. A man who has been both blind and a fool learns the uselessness of speeches. "Come home. Not I don't mean Ashford is yours to enter as what asterisk ever you choose, guest or stranger, or I'll reopen Winter's cottage. I'll restore your father's name in every parish record. He ran out of restorable things and stood before her, the most powerful man in the county, with empty hands. Tell me what can be mended. I'll spend the rest of my life mending it." "I know you will," Clara said gently. "You're a good man, Edmund. I always knew it, even that year you threw teapots." "Then—" "Thomas gave me 3 things." She looked past him at the courthouse doors, at the ring now sealed in the clerk's evidence box. "The proof, the court has it. The promise to look after you kept and finished today. You don't need looking after any more. And the message." Her gray eyes came back to his, and they were kind, and the kindness was terrible. "You should have it standing up, so stand up straight." He stood up straight. "He had almost nothing left," she said. "He spent it like this. He said, 'Tell my brother the fire was never his to carry,' he said. Tell Edmund, and her voice, her low, warm, unbreakable voice, broke at last on the last message it had carried. Tell him he was the best of us. The steps, the square, the whole cheering county fell away. Edmund stood with his brother's words going through him like light through a window. He was the best of us asterisk, the very words he had spoken over the fire, given back across 3 years and 1 grave. And by the time he could see again through his miraculous, useless, streaming eyes, Clara Winters had gone down the steps and was walking away through the crowd. He caught her once more at the corner. He was not proud anymore. He had watched Pride's trial and seen how it ended. "Clara, please, I love you. I loved you blind and I love you seeing and I will love you." "I know," she said, "that's the hardest part." She looked up at him, and now, only now at the very end, he saw the anger. Quiet, folded, 3 years deep. "You loved my voice, Edmund. You loved it enough to marry it without a face. And then you saw the face, and between one heartbeat and the next, between an asterisk newspaper engraving and a word from Victor, the voice meant nothing. 3 years of nights weighed against one piece of paper, and the paper won." She shook her head slowly. "The whole county condemned me once without asking. I survived it. They were strangers. But you condemned me twice asterisk. The second time, you knew me better than anyone alive. And you still chose the engraving." "Clara." "I don't hate you. I understand you. That's worse. So no, Edmund. Not the manor, not the cottage, not a duchess's ring to match the county's cheering." She stepped back and gave him, one last time, the smallest of smiles. "I kept every promise. I'm going to go and find out what I am when I'm not keeping one." And she walked away up the North Road, one small bag head high in the sunlight, while the Duke of Ashford stood at the corner. And for the first time in this entire story, dear listener, did the wisest thing a man in love can do. He let her go. She went back to Mrs. Fletcher's dress shop, because Mrs. Fletcher had wept at the trial in the right places, and because the little room above the shop was the only home that had never lied to her. The county sent letters. She sewed. Invitations came from families who had once crossed the street. She sewed. Her father's name went back in the parish rolls, gold-lettered. The newspaper printed a trembling apology on page 1 where the engraving had been. She sewed. And then, on an ordinary Tuesday evening in September, as the lane below her window emptied and the lamps came on, she heard a sound that stopped her needle mid-stitch. A voice down in the lane, reading aloud. It is a truth universally acknowledged. She did not go to the window. She sat frozen, needle in the air, while the voice, a deep voice, a careful voice, a voice that had clearly been asterisk practicing read on. 1 hour exactly. Then it stopped and said to no one, to the window, to the dark, "Good night." And footsteps went away down the lane. He came the next night, and the next. He stood in the lane below her window, the Duke of Ashford, in plain clothes, hat off, book in hand, and read aloud for 1 hour, to a window that never opened. The town noticed by the 4th night, of course. By the 2nd week it was the finest entertainment in the county, the great Duke, standing in a market lane like a schoolboy, reading novels at a seamstress's shutters. Boys mimicked him. A ballad appeared. Mrs. Fletcher took to leaving a lit lantern on the shop step out of pity, so at least the man could see his page. It rained the 3rd week. He came with the book under an oilskin and read soaked to the collar. It turned cold. He came in a greatcoat and his breath fogged around the words. 20 nights. 30. He never knocked. He never called up. He never sent gifts or letters or Duke's lawyers. He just came at 8 o'clock, their asterisk hour, and gave the voice back. Because that was the thing, dear listener, the thing that finally began, night by night, stitch by stitch, to loosen something in the room above the shop. Anyone can send diamonds. Any man can kneel handsomely once in public and count it courage. But to be laughed at nightly in a market lane, in the rain, in the cold, for 40 nights, expecting nothing, that is not a gesture. That is a man reading to a blind house on the one chance the house can hear him. He had learned it, she understood slowly from her. It was her own 3 years given back in miniature. I will sit with you in the dark. I will ask for nothing. I will just be the voice. On the 40th night, it snowed early. He came anyway. His hands were bare, some fool part of him, she thought furiously, watching now from behind the curtain as she had secretly watched for a week. Some fool ducal part of him hadn't thought of gloves, and he was turning pages with fingers gone clumsy and red, and he was mangling the passage. Her asterisk passage, the one she loved best. He got the phrasing wrong in the same place, twice. The window opened. "You're reading it asterisk wrong," said Clara Winters into the falling snow. "You've been reading it wrong for a week. The pause comes asterisk after asterisk perhaps, not before how you were ever considered educated." Down in the lane, very slowly, the Duke of Ashford lowered the book. Snow settled on his shoulders, his bare head, his upturned face, and on a smile beginning there that no one in the county had seen since before the fire. "Then come down," he said, "and read it properly." A silence. The snow ticked against the shutters. "One chapter," said the window sternly. "One chapter," agreed the lane. She came down in her shawl with a lamp and sat on the shop step beside the lantern, and took the book out of his frozen hands. "Sit, you enormous fool, before you die of it," and found the page. He sat on the step of a dress shop in the snow, shoulder to shoulder with a seamstress, while the whole scandalized, delighted town watched through its curtains. "It is a truth universally acknowledged," read Clara Winters, in the low, warm voice that had carried a man out of 3 years of darkness, "that a single man in possession of a good fortune—" She stopped. The next words stood up from the page all by themselves. "Must be in want of a wife," said Edmund quietly. Clara looked at the snow. Clara looked at the book. Clara looked at last at him. "Ask me tomorrow," she said. And then, for the first time in 3 years, and he would swear afterward it was the finest sound his ears had ever been given, finer than her reading, finer than the judge's asterisk discharged asterisk, Clara Winters laughed. "No," she said, watching his face fall and rise like a boy's. "No, I don't think I'll make either of us wait for tomorrow ever again. Ask me now." He asked her now. The window above the bakery heard the answer, and the baker's wife told the chandler's wife, and by morning it was in 3 parishes, and by Sunday in 5. The Duke was to marry the voice, and the whole county was invited. 1 year later, if you had walked up the long drive of Ashford Manor on a certain October evening, 1 year later, you would have noticed the small things first. The east wing, rebuilt, its new stone still a shade paler than the old like skin that has healed over a burn. Lamps in every window, turned up bright. No one in that house kept the lamps low anymore. And from the tall library windows, drifting out over the terrace into the autumn dark, a sound the old servants had learned to set their evenings by. A voice reading aloud. But if you had crept close, and half the new housemaids had, at one time or another, so you would be in good company, you would have found the voice was not the one this story began with. It was the Duke's. He read carefully. He read the way a man reads who is repaying a debt, a page at a time, a night at a time, and he had informed his wife on the first evening of their marriage of the exact terms. 3 years of nights, madam. I have counted them. 1,095 evenings you read to me, and I intend to return every single one, so you had better resign yourself to a long life. The Duchess of Ashford, for her part, had resigned herself. She sat curled in the great chair by the fire, asterisk his old chair. She had claimed it as spoils of war, with her feet tucked up and her mending forgotten in her lap, listening. Sometimes she corrected his phrasing. He got the pause before, perhaps, wrong roughly once a fortnight, and the servants noticed it was always on evenings when the Duchess seemed tired, and always ended in her laughing, and had privately concluded his Grace did it on purpose. They had never once, in a year, missed 8 o'clock. Not for the harvest dinner, not for the Lord Lieutenant, not for the trial in London that spring, where 12 jurors no one had bought heard what a clerk had written down in a country courtroom. You were supposed to stay blind, and sent Victor Ashford to spend the rest of his life in a place with very small windows. Edmund attended one day of it. He came home, said only, "Thomas can rest," and was in the library by 8. Above the fireplace, where a mirror used to hang, there was now a portrait of a young man with kind eyes and untidy hair, laughing at something outside the frame. The painter had worked from sketches and from an old valet's tearful directions. Mr. Prout, restored to the household and to his pipe, had stood at the artist's elbow for a month saying, "No, sir, warmer." Master Thomas was warmer than that, until one day the whole room had gone quiet, because it was him. Beneath the portrait, a small brass plate. It did not say the dates. It did not say beloved brother though he was. It said only, "He trusted the right person." And on the desk by the window, in a plain silver frame that visiting fine ladies always noticed and never quite dared ask about, there was a page torn from an old book. On it, in a woman's careful hand, one unfinished line. "If you ever learn my real name, please remember the voice first." And below it, in a man's strong slanted writing, the line finished at last. "I did, and then I married her." The clock struck 9. The Duke closed the book. "Chapter's end," he said. "And don't look at me like that. You made the one chapter rule yourself on a shop step in the snow. I was there." "I made it for a fool who wouldn't wear gloves," said the Duchess. "One more page." "One more page," agreed the Duke, who had, you understand, been going to read one more page all along. She rose instead, crossed to his chair, and settled against his shoulder to read it with him. Her hands rested on the open book, bare hands, scarred hands. She had stopped hiding them the day after the wedding. Her husband had a habit, absent-minded, constant, of lifting them to his lips whenever they came near enough, mid-sentence, mid-argument, mid-page, as now, as if the scars were something written that he was still, every day, learning to read. "Edmund, the page." He turned it. Outside, the autumn wind moved through the dark gardens, past the pale new stone of the east wing, past a lit house that had once been a blind one. And if the dead can hear us, and there was a woman in that library who believed, on good evidence, that love doesn't stop being love just because one heart stops beating, then somewhere a young man with kind eyes was listening to the voices tangled together over one page, arguing gently about a pause, and he was satisfied. She had looked after his brother. She had kept every promise. And every night at 8 o'clock, in the great library of Ashford Manor, for the rest of their long and noisy and happy lives, the Duke read, and the Duchess listened, and neither of them ever again sat alone in the dark. Thank you for listening to the story all the way to the end. Please tell us which city you're watching from and what the story made you feel. Don't forget to subscribe so you won't miss new stories.